of Adelaide and your surrounding area, if you wish. Okay, we only have one more topic to explore, challenges in addressing, challenges to address and opportunities to embrace. Decisions about climate finance should be and often are data-driven, but often they don't take certain important factors into account. I'm going to ask each one of you on this panel, what do you think is undervalued in climate finance decision-making, or what data is missing from these conversations? David, would you lead off on that one?
What's missing in Uganda, because I can speak for Uganda only, and I think it's this local inclusion, right? I feel like many of the initiatives are not exactly inclusive, and the local communities are not part of the process. And I think if that's done, it should be, we should see a lot more success. But also, how do we get a lot of the solutions framing to be really data-driven? How do we get the cities? How do we get the ministries of environment to be directly utilizing data to make the decisions that they'd like to make or the solutions they'd like to build?
Thank you. James, how would you answer that question?
There's a couple of things. First is a lot of these models don't really give us a good enough picture in the longer term picture, and by that I mean in terms of really understanding how risk can spiral. I know Linda talked to trying to capture those risks in the financial, but they do spiral and they go from one thing to the next, and our models aren't capturing that in the financial sense. The other thing is the role of nature. I don't think our financial models are really taking into account the role of nature and the value, and also the cost of not valuing it. And then finally, it's important that we look at, instead of just the easy things to count, like how many solar panels, what about the more difficult things to count, like the systemic changes that come about, and calculate that in determining where the finance flows. So that's where the improvements are needed. If we were to do all of that, better risk in terms of calculating the risk, understanding the value of nature when we're making our financial decisions, and rethinking how we measure the impact, I think there's a lot of room for improvement.
Great, good to know. Linda, what's your answer to the same question?
Sure. I think what's undervalued so far has been where geographically actual risk and opportunities lie. I think that, in the financial sector, we talk a lot about climate metrics and then transition metrics, but increasingly it's location that actually drives financial outcomes. And that's not just the physical risk that we're talking about, but actually the policy landscape. So I think that at the national level, at the subnational level, there's a lot of policy changes, and it really matters in terms of driving financial outcomes. So if you have, two factories with producing the same things, same emissions, they actually have very different transition costs and transition opportunities depending on the siting of that jurisdiction and whether that's tightening carbon rules, or there are going to be clean tech subsidies or trade policies that will kind of determine the outcome financially. So I think that, a lot of investors are really demanding that both sides of the story to the location, which is not just the physical exposures, but also the policy environment surrounding that particular physical location.
Great, thank you. Lord Mayor, you are also kind of representing the C40 here. And I want to ask you the same kind of question, but what sectors or adaptation priorities would benefit most from improved data?
Well, I think that we all are into the adaptation around stormwater and heat resilience. And I think that we keep saying, and one of the glories of this presidency has been that we've identified the role of subnational governments. And I keep saying we've got boots on the ground, we've got shovels ready, and we can do things. And having the data that can give outcomes and feed it up to our national bodies so that they can show that they've made their targets would be a great achievement for all of us. And it would help our national governments, and it would allow people to tell the stories. Because one of the challenges we have at the moment is that there's a degree of misinformation, and people are being convinced that renewables are not stable, that they're too expensive. And I think the stories have to be told about how certain areas have done things that have been magical, businesses have invested and had a profit, and at the end of the day, finance has to go to where there's profitability. And telling the stories is really important, and we all have a role in telling those stories constantly so that we can counteract what is beginning to unnerve some of our friends. And we can't afford to be unnerved by misinformation, bots, and general nonsense that's on the internet. It's a really important moment for us to support finance, support governments, and support our politicians who are doing the right thing.
Yeah, good for you. And I want to, for this and many other things, express my admiration for President Lula, who has described this summit as a truth summit. There is such an asymmetry in the information strategies of the climate deniers and the climate delayers. We just heard from one of those a couple of weeks ago, and the climate advocates. Because these bots, you mentioned the bots that spread all of this misinformation. It is shocking how publics around the world have been inundated with highly inaccurate, misleading information, and much of it financed by fossil fuel polluters who are trying to extend their business plans for as long as they possibly can before the inevitable transition takes hold.
May I say there is an irony, though, because I have yet to meet anyone anywhere in the world that wants to be in a polluted world with loss of animals and